Sefer Hasidim writes about a concept that some of you might be familiar called the Met Mitzvah. The Met Mitzvah is a Jew who has died or has been killed, who's lying in the field, with no one around to take care of him, to bury him, to give him a Jewish burial. It is incumbent, even on a Kohen Gadol, on the high priest, who is prohibited from making himself impure by involving himself by taking care of that person. Nevertheless, because of the importance of this mitzvah, there's no one else to do it. This is a Met Mitzvah. Even the Kohen Gadol defile himself and take care of this individual. Goes on to Sefer Hasidim. There are certain mitzvot out there, certain isurim, certain commandments that are pretty much like this Met Mitzvah. They're lying on the floor with no one paying attention, no one willing to pick them up, take care of them, and just waiting for somebody to take care of them. These commandments, these prohibitions, are very, very important prohibitions that unfortunately some of us are not paying enough attention. One of them, not only in this generation, but in many, many generations throughout Jewish history, has been the prohibition of speaking Lashon Hara. This has always, for some reason, been considered a Met Mitzvah. No one has done enough. No one has paid enough attention to it. No one has taken it upon himself or herself to seriously handle it, seriously take care of it, seriously lift it up. I would think, as some of you would, that perhaps the prohibition of Avodah Zarah, idol worshiping, is something a lot more serious. But the rabbis tell us, Avodah Zarah, even if it were to be rampant amongst the Jewish people, but they would be be'ahdut, they would be unified amongst them, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu will forgive them. However, Lashon Hara, talking bad, people gossip about each other, is a lot more serious because it leads to divisiveness. It leads to machloket, to conflict, which is the exact opposite of ahdut or unity. It is therefore a lot more serious than any other avon, any other sin we can imagine. What I do not want to do today is tell you about the halachot, about the seriousness of Lashon Hara, because I'm sure many of you will hear many classes and lectures this coming month and the following about this important subject. Instead, what I would like to do in the next few minutes is do something which is not too common, and that is speak about the steps we may take, some of the steps, to completely drive Lashon Hara away. Not just to recognize it, not just to know the halachot of what is permitted to say and what is not permitted, but what can one do to completely drive it away from one's home. I put together 5 steps, 5 methods perhaps, that one can use. It's a combination of all 5 that are necessary to drive it away. Before we begin with these 5 steps, we must know what Lashon Hara is. Where does it come from? What is the root of this desire to speak bad about other people? Human nature cannot tolerate to see someone else's successes, while it itself believes and is convinced that it's in a miserable situation. And the only way it can comfort itself, the only way it can feel content, is when it focuses on the negativity of another individual. That is why the rabbis have termed the concept sarut ayin. Sarut ayin means a narrowing of the eye. The eye is narrow. Why is the eye narrow? Because it chooses to focus narrowly on one particular area of another individual, specifically the negative area, the negativity. Because that is what makes it content. Now I'm equal to him. He has as many weaknesses as I do. He's also bad in this particular way. He's not superior to me. Sarut ayin therefore means to focus narrowly only on that which is negative, which unfortunately leads to the desire to speak bad, to feel comfortable, to not have any qualms about speaking bad about someone else. One is comfortable. Human nature feels comfortable about that. So let's begin with step number 1. Franklin Roosevelt gave a very important speech to Congress after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in World War II. The essence of the speech was a declaration of war on Japan. And I ask you, what's the significance of declaring war? Letting just tell the generals and the army to launch an attack, to get the army ready to go to war. What is the purpose of formally getting Congress together and declaring a war? But it's very important. Psychologically and emotionally, the American people had to recognize that the Japanese is an enemy. We're not just going to war against anybody, we're going to war against an enemy. And by declaring war, by formally declaring it, the American people have come to recognize Japan in those days as a true enemy. The first steps in combating Lashon Hara is that one must recognize and declare this is an enemy of the Jewish people. It has always been one of the greatest troublemakers, the infighting that has existed amongst us. One therefore must recognize and declare to himself and to his family, this is an enemy that is lurking out there, that we must drive away. It's always going to be there. We must do whatever we can to defeat it and not let him into our homes. Step number 2. We said Sarut Ayin means the narrowing of one's eye, the narrowing of one's focus. Then one must take this opposite approach, to do whatever he can to broaden one eye. After all, Hashem tells us in the Torah, I created man, whether he's Jewish or not, in the image of Hashem. Everyone is special in some way. Don't think he is superior than you. If he has something that you're lacking, then you have something that he's lacking. We all have something special about us. Each one can contribute something. And if one can contribute this, then the other one can contribute that. We're not necessarily superior. We're all necessary. We're all important. We're all special in some way. Broadening our eyes means to focus on the positive that everyone has. If one would not have anything positive about him, Hashem would not put him in this world. If he's here, there's a reason for it. Broadening our eyes means not just to see or to concentrate on the negativity, but to look at the great deal of good that exists in every human being, Jew or non-Jew. Number 3, which is a very, very important point, which unfortunately very, very few people speak about, and that is being very careful when one is at home, around the Shabbat table, with his children, to be very careful not to stir up any machloket, any arguments about any Jewish group. What I mean by that is the old machloket, the old fighting that still continues between those who come from Lithuanian homes, those who come from Hasidic homes, and even amongst the Hasidic, those who come from Satmar or from Lubavitch, or whatever group might be. There has been too much infighting. And I hear about this every other day. It has not stopped. Even amongst the best families who claim to be observant and God-fearing and Torah learning, unfortunately this has not escaped their home. The children may overhear what the parents say. If a parent might be very disgruntled or very unhappy about a particular group which he disagrees with, he should be very tactful in not sharing how upset he is with his children. Because those children go to the school and they pick on those kids who belong to the opposite camp. Terrible thing to do. Every group is special. I come from a Hasidic home. I studied with Lithuanian Jews in Lithuanian yeshivot, and many of my friends, including this congregation, are Sephardim. So I grew up with all 3, and I love all 3 of them. Everyone is special in some way. God forbid, Chas v'shalom, there should never be any arguments about who is good and who is bad, who is superior. It's a terrible machloket. No good comes out from this. Number 4, which I also think is a very significant step. What do we do if nevertheless we just have that temptation to speak bad? What do we do about it? It's a very powerful temptation. I think one of the best advices that the Torah gives us is to do chesed, to do acts of kindness, precisely with those who don't like, who we wouldn't think of doing acts of kindness to. The Torah tells us, for example, when you see the donkey of your enemy, not your friend, your enemy, is having a hard time with his load, you might think, I'm not going to help him out. Why should I go out of my way to help him? I don't like him. I can't stand him. No, the Torah says, go ahead, assist him. Give him whatever aid you can. Why does the Torah use the word azov? Azov means to let go. It should have used the word azor, to help, or some other language that denotes assistance. What does it mean, azov? But perhaps what lies behind these words Azot was when you do acts of kindness with those who you dislike, azot, little by little you will let go of that inner hatred, that enmity that you have in your heart. By forcing yourself to go out of your way to help those who you dislike, then you're little by little letting go of those ill feelings you have towards him. There's a story with Rabbi Elyahu Kin. He was once going to a community by train. And in that train, not too far from him, was seated another Jew who was headed towards the same community. He was glad to see Rabbi Elyahu Kin, but he did not know that the Jew was sitting next to him with Rabbi Elyahu Kin. And he gave the rabbi a very hard time. He started smoking in front of him. And after a few minutes, he complained, why don't you just open the window, it's so stuffy here. After a few minutes, he complained again, why don't you close the window, it's so cold. He gave the rabbi a very hard time on that train ride. When they finally arrived in town, and this young man realized by the great amount of people who were waiting for his house that this was the rabbi who he gave such a hard time, he did not know what to do. The first moment he had, he ran to the rabbi's house and begged him for forgiveness. The rabbi said, what are you here for, young man? The young man said, I'm here to be tested, to receive a diploma certificate for Shechitah. So the rabbi says, first of all, I forgive you. Now, I want you to go to this man who will prepare you for it. Then I want you to stay at this gentleman's home. And after that, he took care of this young man's needs. All of the needs of this young man, the rabbi took care of. When the people around the rabbi approached the rabbi and asked him, why are you going out of your way to do so much for this young man? It wouldn't have been enough if you forgave him. Why are you doing so much for him? The rabbi said, I want to be sure that there's nothing left in me that feels bad toward this young man. Forgiving is not enough. I have to do acts of kindness, to go out of my way to help him, to make sure that I don't away any bad feelings that may have remained with me from that train ride. The Chafetz Chaim says something very similar. In the name of Rabbi Elyahu, the Chafetz Chaim says as follows. If one spoke Lashon Hara against someone, and that someone never knew, never found out that Lashon Hara was said on him, nevertheless, this man who spoke Lashon Hara, who is doing teshuvah and repenting, needs to approach that individual who he spoke against and ask him for forgiveness. Why? That individual never knew, never found out. He's not aware that something was said about him. Perhaps his reasoning is as follows. For one humbles himself and approaches that individual who he spoke bad about. The fact that he's going out of his way, he's making sure that nothing is left in his heart against that person. It's not enough to say Slach Lavinu, to ask Hashem to forgive us. It is important to go out of our way, even if it's difficult, and humble ourselves, so that none of that enmity, those bad feelings remain in our heart. But perhaps there's something more in the Chesed. Chesed is the ultimate challenge to see how unselfish we are. Chesed can also be a lifesaver. I want to share with you a fascinating story that happened a few years ago in Bnei Brak. Incredible. There's a poor family in Bnei Brak who's so poor that some people in that neighborhood have taken it upon themselves to buy the family 8 chickens for Shabbat, for every Shabbat. They would usually bring it on Thursday. One week the chickens didn't arrive. The mother was very concerned. But finally, Friday morning, the last minute, just enough time to prepare for Shabbat, the chickens arrived, 8 chickens. She immediately puts them in the refrigerator. No time to put them in the freezer. About an hour goes by, and a neighbor from upstairs realized that they need a chicken too. They're just missing 1 chicken. The neighbor comes down to the poor family. The mother opens up the door. The neighbor says, can I have 1 chicken? So she starts thinking to herself, she starts hesitating, chickens, we eat all 8 chickens, we not eat all 8 chickens. And she tells the neighbor, let me go ask my husband. She goes to her husband, and the husband hears the question, and the husband says, of course, give her 1 of the chickens. The mother approaches the refrigerator, and as soon as she opens up the refrigerator, one of her kids falls out, fainted. They rush into the hospital. The doctor said, had you been 1 minute late to open up that refrigerator, you would have lost your boy. Had that neighbor not come down to ask for chicken, had that mother or father hesitated an extra minute, they would have lost more than just a chicken. Chesed is a lifesaver. The the ultimate challenge of how unselfish we are. Step number 5, which is the last step that I want to discuss, which applies to Tisha B'Av. We must ask ourselves constantly, throughout the year, but especially on Tisha B'Av, what is this day all about? What are we fasting for so many years after the fact? And the answer, of course, if we ask, we will receive the answer, Sinat Chinam, Lashon, Machloket, baseless hatred, infighting, conflicts. But many people, for some reason, don't ask this question. They don't ask why the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. And it is for these people that the rabbis intended some very, very sharp remarks. The rabbis tell us, if the Beit HaMikdash is not rebuilt in our generation, it is as though we destroyed it. Why are we to blame? Because we don't ask the question why it was destroyed. Those who don't ask the question do not know the answer and therefore do not know what to do to rectify the problem. We must ask that question. Why don't many ask that question? Perhaps they're just very comfortable. They have 2-3 cars, 2 mates, having a good life. Why should they ask such a difficult question? But I have a suggestion for those of you who may not have asked that question. I'd like to offer the following suggestions for those who have never shed a tear on Tisha B'Av. Many of us, when we have free time at home, love to sift through albums. Albums that bring back memories, joyous moments, smiles in our faces. On the day of Tisha B'Av, let us open up a different album. An album of all the sorrow, of all the pain and suffering, pages of Jewish history that are full of sorrow. And go through every page of that album in your mind. Beginning with the first temple, the destruction, to the second temple, to the Crusades, to the Inquisition, to the pogroms in the Ukraine and Poland, and finally to the recent Holocaust. One wants to think about all that pain and suffering. Hopefully, opening up that album will open up his heart as well to his Jewish brother and sister. And he will think twice before he speaks Lashon. Many of us are a lot more excited, a lot more anxious when looking forward to a piece of mail that needs to be coming. And when it does not come, that very important piece of mail, we call up the company. Where is my rebate? Where is my refund? We're looking forward to getting that piece of mail, and we're very much upset and anxious to find out why it hasn't arrived. How many of us are so anxious to ask, why hasn't Mashiach arrived yet? Tisha B'Av is at the very end of the year, and it's there for a reason. Perhaps at the very end of the year, we must feel glad about something else besides the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Another year has gone by, and Mashiach has not come yet. And these are the kinds of thoughts, perhaps, that if we have in our mind, will help us drive away that Lashon, that enmity. I turn to you as women. Perhaps you should take the lead and draw strings on some very special women of our past. Yocheved and Miriam, the foresight that they had. Ruth Aviyah, what devotion. Devorah and Leviah, what leadership. Hannah, the perseverance that she showed. She never gave up. And last but not least, Esther and Yehudit in the story of Hanukkah, the courage, the great courage that they had with the Jewish people. Only by maintaining a sustained effort against combating Lashon Hara will we, B'ezrat Hashem, able to drive it away forever, and hopefully strengthen that bond amongst ourselves. That bond which is the most important ingredient which all of us need to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash in the Amen.